Hello class, let's cover chapter 13 this time. This is about public relations, influencer marketing, social media, and corporate advertising. The learning outcomes are first to discuss the role of public relations as part of a broader strategy of IMC, Integrated Marketing Communications. Two, identify the objectives and tools of public relations. 3. Describe the basic strategies that are most often used for public relation activities. 4. Summarize how companies use influencer marketing programs. 5. Describe how marketers use social media to promote brands as a complement to public relations and influencer marketing activities. And 6. Discuss the applications and objectives of corporate advertising. So first, we should understand public relations as one of the different tools available for the marketer in the promotional mix, right? Along with advertising, personal selling, self-promotions, etc. So public relations provides communications to foster goodwill between a firm and its constituent groups. That's a key part of this definition is to foster goodwill. Other tools of the promotional mix are sometimes better suited for informing, for persuading, changing opinions, triggering purchase and trial. But in the case of public relations, what you want as an outcome is that consumers pay attention and attend to the messages in a more naturally way that you would do through traditional advertising, right? So this is something less intrusive, less aggressive, or at least not as commercially motivated as would be perceived a conventional effort through advertising. So you try to make this public relation effort more natural, right? Consumers, as a result, will pass the messages through word of mouth along to family and friends because these are things that are interesting to them. That is the goal of public relations, to tell the audience, the public, your segments of consumer, things that are relevant to them. And it doesn't mean that these are isolated efforts. Once again, we are talking about an integrated marketing campaign where you use other tools to reinforce the messages through other vehicles, right? To radio, television, conventional media, print media, and other tools that we have talked about throughout the course, right? Now, the efforts of PR will focus on communication that foster goodwill not only with customers, but also with other constituent groups, right? Such as stockholders, right? Sometimes you have public relation activities and press releases, interviews, etc. We will talk about those in a minute, that are more aimed towards stockholders, for example, towards owners of the firm, toward employees. Sometimes the public relation activity intends to have an impact on government entities, on non-governmental organizations, and the general public. right? We see, for instance, companies that face troubles with their employees, as this case Walmart, that is being in controversial issues and the debate regarding the right for unionizing of its employees, right? They cannot um, get or constitute a labor union. So this is something that, of course, represents for companies like Walmart a stain in their image, in their reputation, and one of the strategies that they use to counter that is the public relations. Other corporations like Nike, right, as we see here, they face criticism because the production of their shoes and their clothing and apparel in third world or developing nations that employ child labor. And some groups of consumers, of course, are concerned about that. And again, one of the most common tools that we see these companies like Nike utilize is public relations. So what we see what we see here is a trend in terms of the use of public relations as part of integrated marketing campaigns, more and more because consumers are becoming increasingly sophisticated, more critic about what companies and brands do. Consumers have more control of the conversation that goes on, particularly through social media networks, that, as you remember, this is the category of communication vehicles for which the marketer has little of or no control, right? Compared to conventional advertising and other forms of communications, these many-to-many communication approaches in which consumers talk and have their opinion and organize boycotts against brands, this is something that companies do not have as much control as in the past, before technological advances allowed consumers to be interconnected. So marketers are just starting to learn how to manage this this field, this area of public opinion, for which there is a even greater challenge, right? By trying to influence the opinions of consumers. We will talk about that later today. So what are the objectives that we can list as the major, the most principal types of goals for public relations? First, as we mentioned already, promoting goodwill, right? This is about the overall attitude and opinion towards a company, just in the same way that we have attitudes, positive or negative, towards other people, right? Other acquaintances and people around us. The same thing is true for companies and brands. Sometimes the objectives of public relations are more towards promoting a product or service. Not always it is for handling crisis. Sometimes it is that case, but not always. Sometimes you are launching a new version, a new product that you want people to know about, and one of the different approaches is through public relations. Sometimes you want to communicate internally with your employees, with your staff and personnel, especially large corporations, right, where you have multinational companies worldwide or in different countries that it's not just enough to send an email or talk directly face to face as you would do in a smaller business. So public relations also is useful for that. Many times we see, and this is something that more recently we have a number of examples, public relations used for counteracting negative publicity because there is a scandal, because there is a situation that was not handled properly, right? We remember some of the major airlines in the last couple of years that have faced significant backlash and criticism from consumers because they don't treat their passengers in a respectful or appropriate manner. So then you have those airlines coming out with public relations focus strategy to try to relieve or reduce the damage, and of course trying to restore the image. What about government relationships? Of course, lobbying is one of those activities that fall under the umbrella of public relations, right? Especially those firms for which government decisions, legislation, and regulation from Congress or new laws can impact um, their financial performance, the bottom line, their business. Then you have companies that are, of course, trying to influence the legislative process. Of course, there are rules, these are very regulated activities, but it's there, and you have firms that are specialized in that type of public relation, not about promoting brands or new products. No, specific for lobbying, right? The tobacco industry, pharmaceutical industry organizations. Now with the negotiation that we've seen of uh, free trade agreements, right? Not only with in the North American region, but with other latitudes. Um, you have producers, manufacturers, business sectors in the US that are either in favor or against, so they have their agenda. Uh, and one of the ways they use public relations is by doing lobbying. Sometimes you use your uh, platforms, your resources as a firm to do public relations activities that are targeting customers not to sell something, not to handle a crisis situation, but to give advice and counsel. Maybe you have you do a purchase, right? And this happened to me recently. I purchased a refrigerator by Samsung, and I needed to change the water filter of this refrigerator, and I didn't know how to install it. So what I did was to get on YouTube in the Samsung channel to find their videos where they tell users how to install on their own their filters for the refrigerator, right? So that is a way of supporting consumers, providing guidance on or advice in some of the typical situations that you would encounter using that product. So it's not a traditional advertising material, it's not a personal selling effort, but this is one example of using public relations resources as a support for consumers. One of the tools, talking about the tools for public relations, because we were looking at objectives, right? These are the objectives. Now let's look at the tools. One of the common tools utilized by firms is press releases. What we see here is a press release issued by JetBlue after a tremendous crisis they faced back in 2007. It was called, or people may remember this as the Valentine's Day JetBlue crisis, because it was this horrible weather. There was this winter storm in New York, and you had tens of or hundreds, I believe, including other airlines, of airplanes that were stranded in the JFK airport, right? So you had not only hundreds of flights operated by JetBlue that were delayed or were canceled, but you also had other airlines. However, it was JetBlue that the airline that handled this situation, operationally speaking, in the worst manner. They did not have the resources, the communication technology, the personnel, and you had passengers who were stranded on board for hours with no food, with no refreshments. So this went online. This was already 2007, where there were social media platforms surging, and people started to voice this, and JetBlue had to come out to the public, not just with press releases, but also other tools, and we will see in a minute, trying to handle this situation. Providing interviews and press conferences. I know this is a not very recent example, but it was one of the first iconic textbook kind of examples that illustrates how damaging the image of a brand can be. However, also represented an opportunity for JetBlue to handle the situation appropriately. And if many of you probably don't recall this or do not know about this, which happens some years ago, that's a signal. That means that the damage was controlled, and over the long term, this is something that did not damage the reputation in a lasting way, as sometimes other firms face reputational damage for several years. Here, this is a YouTube video of how the CEO of JetBlue had to come out to explain to the public on national television, right? And well, as you can see, this is not very new video, not very recent. This guy, who is not anymore in the show, and he had some hair still there. So he went on to interview the CEO, and I think the most interesting part of this example is that not only the CEO had to come out to try to explain and justify what happened, because that was part of the problem, that people didn't know what went wrong, but also JetBlue came out with this so-called Bill of Rights for consumers, as we see here. This was the reaction of the company to say not just we do apologize and we say I'm sorry, but we also establish a new set of rules and guarantees for you as a customer to trust us again. So if something happens in a situation similar to that was faced on Valentine's of that year, if something happens, you will have some rewards, you will have some warranties, you will have some free and compensation in the form of products or trips that you can use, air tickets. So this is a commitment that we make so that you give us another opportunity. And again, apparently this is something that worked to some extent reasonably well. And again, this is something that had to be communicated not only through press releases, but through interviews with the media, press conference, etc. Sometimes you have other type of tools which are feature stories, right? Feature stories are specific in that you have, as we see here for this feature story on HEB, it's a specific story on what the company is doing. What are the actions that are being taken? For example, in this case, what HEB did in the midst of Hurricane Harvey here in Corpus Christi not long ago, right? So this feature story is basically trying to tell the public it's not paid advertisement, right? So public relations is not paid advertisement, but it's a story on what HEB had to go through in order to operationally and logistically be able to have their stores open and running as fast as possible to serve the people in the catastrophe zone, not only here in the coastal bend area, but also in the Houston area, moving employees from other areas from the state, right? From Austin, from San Antonio, from the Rio Grande Valley, to try to face this problem. And again, this is not saying, well, purchase from us, this is what we are selling you, we want you to come more often. No, this is a story about what the company is doing, and in a indirect manner, in an indirect form, this is creating goodwill, because if you have a company that you can tell that cares about the people, about the community, then it is a company that people hold favorable attitudes towards them. So feature story is of course one way of doing public relations, which, one more time, is more natural. It has more credibility. People will regard and consider and believe more and trust more these stories than a conventional advertising piece. In terms of communicating with the internal customers or employees or the personnel of the organization, one more time, specifically for larger companies and corporations, sometimes you have companies newsletters, and it doesn't have to be transnational kind of huge companies. As long as you have a number of employees that warrant doing newsletters, you can use them, and it's not expensive necessarily. You can now, with digital technologies, distribute them online, right? Here, for example, at the university, we have some newsletters. Um, Sometimes these are at the department level, sometimes these are at the university level. But again, trying to communicate with one of the constituents groups, which is employees. And of course, there are other communicational efforts from the university towards the external public, towards students and prospect students, etc. Another important tools of public relation is that of sponsor events. Now here we should not be confounded and take these sponsor events as the sponsorships that we talk about also in this course. The sponsorship that we have talk about is not this type of sponsor event. Here what we try to do is put our name, our brand there, but you do not necessarily do all the support activities that you normally do in sponsorships, right? When we talk about sponsorship, we talk probably about events and fairs and carnivals and concerts where you have, for instance, your stand and you distribute flyers and you sell your product and you give samples and you recruit customers or try to get leads for future contact, like what we see here at this on this slide, right? Is a race or marathon or some type of local event in which Michelob Ultra is a sponsor. You don't expect to have Michelob selling beer at that event, right? So this is kind of a soft approach to sponsors, to sponsoring events. But again, the goal is to create goodwill and favorable attitudes. At the end, they are similar in that sense. Another tool, which is very, very determinant of communication with your public, is creating publicity. Is one of the types or one of the forms of public relations. But here what you want to do very specifically is try to get free media exposure about your activities in such a way that your story, your message will be transmitted and will be watched and seen by others, but it's not gonna cost you as if you were going to pay and purchase media time. One way of telling something to the public is go out there, purchase time at the radio station, in the TV network, or pages at the newspaper. The other way to do it is to make those newspapers talk about you. Make those TV networks or radio stations, shows or programs talk about what you are doing. This is the case going back to the Harvey hurricane that we had here not long ago. Going back to that scenario, this is what happened with Whataburger. And this was a story in the local news channel. I know you may not be able to listen, but basically uh, what Whataburger did was to open their restaurants in Rockport, right? One of the most damaged areas in the coastal bend, and giving free meals to the people, right? They weren't charging for it. Of course, after after looking to this, even if you were not one of the people who got a free meal, of course you form and develop positive attitudes towards a brand, right? Sometimes you have backlash when you do public relation activity that you try to be creative. This is one of the stories that you see on this slide. You have that in your textbook, and it talks about how one company in Boston, they place blinking black boxes on the streets and public places in order to create buzz and people talking about it, kind of something spontaneous. But people thought that these black boxes were bombs, or they had some kind of um, risk, and they alerted the police. And sometimes these public relations activities don't go as you plan. um, However, one more time, there is a margin of non-control, non-absolute control that you have to deal with anyway. For instance, one of these similar situations happened not long ago in New York, right? After you have the movement of women's rights, and you had women marching on the street, and then suddenly you had this fearless girl statue in front of the Wall Street um, bull, which represents the financial might and power of Wall Street. And then you have this statue of the fearless girl that some of you probably have heard of or saw. And this was kind of a symbol of opposition and the power of people, and women in particular, against um, the economic power of Wall Street. And it seemed to be kind of a spontaneous um, uh, idea, but at the end it happened that it was a marketing uh, strategy, a tactic that was launched by State Street, which is a financial investment portfolio firm that is traded in the Nasdaq stock market. And well, people kind of lost credibility on this company because they were trying to take advantage of a legitimate feeling, something that was in the feeling of society, or one segment of society, um, fighting and demonstrating for women's rights. But this company tried to take advantage of it, and some members of the uh, public were not very happy about it. So have to be careful when launching public relations activities. There are two main approaches to these strategies. One approach, which is the one that most companies do not follow, is the proactive public relations strategy. And what do I say? This is the one that is not very often implemented by firms, because the most common, or one of the, at least the most salient approach to public relations, is the reactive public relations strategy. Yes, there are some firms that actively try to look forward into implementing public relations tactics in order to gain competitive advantage in the marketplace, but other companies use it only when there is an issue, a crisis, a reputation problem that needs to be addressed urgently, right? Immediately. So this is the so-called reactive public relations strategy. When you have a proactive strategy, you do as a firm public relations audits, right? What you try to do is to, just like you do a financial or an accounting audit, you do a marketing audit in terms of your image. What is what the public, the way the public views your organization, try to identify aspects that are positive and they are newsworthy, right? That they warrant building on them to gain a competitive edge, and develop a public relation plans. Just like you have a plan for marketing elements such as advertising and personal selling and self-promotion, in that same way you develop a plan of public relation activity for the year or for the next quarter or for the 6 months to come, and you have a budget for that as well. But most firms, they have a reactive public relations strategy. Some firms, like we saw recently in the case of Facebook, they had to come out to explain to the public, and we had on TV Mark Zuckerberg apologizing for the breach of data privacy that that was discovered. So one more time, this is a reactive public relations strategy example. I'm not saying that Facebook does not have a proactive PR strategy. They do, but the one that we remember more, I bet that's your case as well. What is what we remember as a reactive public relations strategy? Well, when they got into problems. There are a number of components for developing a plan, just like in strategic planning lessons or contents that you have seen in other courses. Well, you do a situational analysis, right? You do establish objectives of what you want to accomplish through your public relations programs. You justify and select and decide what are the vehicles, the tools that you will use for accomplishing those objectives that you said. What is the content? So these are the building blocks of public relation plans that, again, not all firms or organizations have, but when there is a need for using public relation, having a plan already in place certainly will be more advantageous and convenient, because in that moment you will have something to work on. You don't have to work from scratch in a rush, in a hurry to react. So it's better to plan, of course. Now, another tool of or program for marketing communications that is similar to public relations or is kind of a support or complementary approach to public relations is that of influencer marketing programs. What are the influencer marketing programs? Well, these are the tools and techniques directed at individuals and groups that have the credibility and the capability of driving positive word of mouth and impressions about a brand. So this is particularly important. Have the credibility and the capability. So you're using another route, another way to getting to a to a point, to an objective, which will be qualitatively different to the traditional tools of the promotion mix. You have professional influencer programs. For example, when you have companies that rely on the recommendation of professionals, right? We see this a lot in healthcare professional, physician, dentist, etc. You have pharmaceutical companies who place an emphasis on promoting their medicines, their drugs, their products with the professionals who recommend to patients purchasing or using those drugs or medicines, right? So it's kind of an indirect approach. These type of programs, again, which we see mostly in certain sectors, um, um, these require a long-term commitment. These are not just short programs that you do every once in a while, because these are the results that you will see on the long run after cultivating, after nurturing this relationship with the professionals who will in turn recommend your products to patients, right? So we see this in the case of uh, healthcare professionals, which is different to the concept of influencer marketing that probably we think more about in terms of um, celebrities or famous people who have their YouTube channel, or they have so many followers in Instagram, right? These popular characters or people who for one or other reason are popular, have many followers, and then companies, then um, businesses try to have those influencers working on their favor in terms of giving positive words about the brand, in terms of showing to their followers how they use a product, how they use a brand. Doesn't matter if we talk about the professional influencer programs or the peer-to-peer influencer program. In both, the marketer is challenged to give a meaningful and relevant topic that the influencers will talk about, right? Because at the end, that's what matters to the public, that this influencer, either peer-to-peer, somebody that you admire or follow on social media, or a healthcare professional, that they are telling you something that matters to you, right? Like your health, for example. But in the case of peer-to-peer influencers, something that matters to you in terms of some type of music that you follow or you like, or preparing vegetarian food, right? Many influencers are famous because they are knowledgeable and experts in vegetarian food. Well, if that's the segment that you're interested, because that's the business sector that you're at, then of course that will be important for you. And the importance of influencer marketing has increased to the extent that now there is a word of mouth marketing association that um, is in charge of organizing conferences and seminars and promoting and fostering the marketing activities targeted to influencer programs, right? So that's just a signal of the importance of this activity within the promotional mix. Examples, you have companies like Ford who launched their Flex SUV first by letting DJs and celebrities try the car and drive it for weeks so that they could talk about it, do their videos about it, and have their blogs about it and write about it so that their followers could could get the message from them again with a higher degree of credibility. Some TV shows, TV series, like the one we see here on the screen, True Blood, well, they have very clearly identified that a an important segment of the viewership for this TV show is people who believe and have a cult, and they have a belief in vampires, right? Because that's what the TV series is about. So they started to target very specifically bloggers and opinion leaders and writers, novel writers, etc., who could serve as intermediaries between the producers of the firm and the potential viewers. So they were trying to promote and create this buzz and word of mouth before launching the TV show. This is of course complemented, and we have talked so far in this video about the role of social media. Many of these activities occur through the resources provided and the platforms available through social media. So I don't need to tell you much about this. You are probably more experts than I am in using social media, because you are the millennial, most of you, not all probably, but most of you are the native generation, the generation that was born and grew up with internet around you, right? So you are used to this. Probably you spend more time in social networks during your day, right? In a typical day, you spend more time on social networks than watching TV or reading or even your classes in college, right? So you are native to social media. You know the different platforms, Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat, etc. So the question here is, what is the way in which a marketer can use those platforms to create and shape conversations? Because that's what you want as a marketer in terms of social networks working in your favor. You want that people talk about you. You want to communicate with them in a way that creates value for your brand, right? Getting feedback sometimes. I mean, sometimes that's one of the major or the fundamental function of a Twitter account for a brand is to get feedback, to complain, to ask questions. If you go into one of these airlines basically any airline, I guess, and go to their Twitter accounts or their Facebook uh, pages, and you will see, read the post. Many of these, or most of these, are customers who are asking about their flight, about a delayed or canceled flight, and things like that. So you want to define or identify what is the best uses that you can do of social media for your brand, and take advantage of it, um, to have people talking about it. Create buzz, stimulating viral marketing, which is one of the ways that we find more examples nowadays. Microblogs like Twitter, right? That, let me open here. That we know Twitter, again, for companies, is one of the primary channels to communicate. We have this KFC Twitter account, and something that, by the way, happened not long ago, and this is related to the public relation, to the feature stories, is in this link. And again, this recording does not allow you to hear the video or listen clearly, but you can always go to Blackboard, download these slides, and you can click on this link if you don't want to Google them. You have them in the material provided for this class. And People magazine, well, their website version, they had this feature story about something curious, something interesting about KFC's Twitter page, and it was that if you pay attention, the Twitter account, they are following only 11 other other accounts or avatars, whatever you want to call them. This is in Spanish, by the way, but these are the number of accounts or avatars or contact that they are following, and these are 11, and this is because this is resembling the 11 herbs and spices of the secret recipe. Who are these 11 people that they are following in Twitter? Well, these are 5 former members of Spice Girls and 6 men who are named Herb. And these are the ones, right? You have the 5 Spice Girls or ex-Spice Girls and other people who are named Herb. So this is kind of a silly, funny, or humorous example of how KFC uses their social media platform to create conversation. And this is something that was on the news, and people talk about it, and it was on TV. It was not long ago. But one more time, this is a combination or the integration of different tools, different vehicles to create this word of mouth about something funny. So if you were not talking about KFC, this is something that just reminds you. And remember, part of the objectives of promotion is to remind, to keep in the top of mind when you recall a brand, you don't forget it. So I think this is a way that contributes to that. Some other tools are not microblogs, but these are like full conventional blogs, right? So you have blogs for a company like Miller Cool and Coors. And if you are someone who is interested in beer, well, then you can go into this blog and learn more and engage in the conversation and post and learn more about something, one more time, that is relevant for this segment or for Harley Davidson riders, right? The same thing. They have their blogs. And again, these are ways that you can not only say something but engage your audience, because those are the things that are interesting to them. You can do, I mean, and this is all about creativity. This is all about what you can do to break through the clutter of other messages from other sources, from other brands. The National Museum in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, when they were ready to open the museum after it was closed for remodelation, they decided to do kind of a flash mob. And this flash mob in a shopping center, in a mall in the Netherlands, was used to create and generate this buzz so that people share this video and it is taken in or picked up in news, right? As we see, this is a Time magazine website. So this is the characterization of the night watch, famous um, this famous piece of art by Rembrandt in the National Museum in Amsterdam. So this is something that was in the news, it was viral, it was shared in social media, and we have other examples. I'm not stopping here. You remember also this type of non-control video of this woman who got a Chewbacca mask, and then it was um, on some TV shows, and actually Kohl's, which was the store where this woman got the Star Wars mask. Well, this is an example of something, one more time, that is, it was not controlled by Kohl's. It was something spontaneous, but they jumped on the bandwagon and they took advantage of this, and they offered her some free stuff and some kind of rewards and compensation. And again, this is something that is there in the media. People talk about it, and it will not last forever. It will not be something permanent, but it's something that, again, is refreshing and spontaneous and helps to break the clutter. I recommend you to watch this YouTube video, which talks about how Volvo Trucks targets not only the drivers or whoever is going to be the user of the trucks, but also family, relatives. And a way to do that is by an aggressive social media and internet approach. So please go into the webs into the Blackboard section where you can download these slides, so you can watch the whole video, and it tells you what are the outcomes in terms of the results of these campaigns and how they increase the number of followers and likes and the word of mouth in social networks. So please look at that. I'm closing this I'm closing this chapter just by reminding you that there is a integration and combination of different vehicles to reach your audiences, so that have been shown in recent years to be more effective than using this channel isolated, right? When you combine entertainment platforms, television, digital media, printed, sponsorship, public relation effort, these are the ones that yield the best results. And finally, let's not forget that part of the public relation activities relate to corporate communications, right? Which includes not just public relations, but an element of advertising. The objectives for advertising are to enhance the firm's image, improve employee morale, and attract new employees. One more time, these are complementary to the public relations activity that we talk about. Communicate views and positions about controversial issues. Sometimes what you want to do is to establish a strong positioning in terms of differentiation against competitors. And we see a number of approaches follow. Many of these are, for example, through the creation of complementary or connected entities or organizations, right? Like, for example, foundations. Many companies, in addition or in a parallel way to their business and commercial activities, they do have their foundations that are the ones that usually are destined to supporting these philanthropic or image or prestige improvement efforts, right? But again, let's not forget that these campaigns will be most effective when the public perceives them as being authentic, right? Let's finish this chapter then, and we will continue with the next chapter.